Finding the Voices.
Voices talk show by Monica Iguodam.
I'm a huge fan of Finding the Voice.
You're doing a great job for Manipur.
Manipur bu prithivida masatak pa
good positive voices and make those voices more visible.
We wanted our voice to reach in all the corners of the world.
Interesting people.
Been finding
voices on
People from our own place.
Share positive stories and inspiring stories and bring out the good stories of Manipur.
Finding the Voices.
Welcome to Finding the Voices. Today we are in Delhi and we have been joined by the author Kausalya Bhattacharjee, who have written 2 books related to Manipur. And first of all, I want to thank you for accepting this interview, because it was such an impromptu plan and you have accommodated this time.
Oh, not at all. Thank you so much. It's a huge pleasure to have met you, because we've been following you Finding the Voices of Manipur for the last 2 years now.
It's been 3 years.
3 years, yeah.
Yes.
Congratulations for that.
Thank you. So to start with, we know about your journalism work, we know about your writing, but if you can share a little bit about your first interaction with Manipur, a little, from, I guess I'm looking more for your personal view in how you started interacting with Manipur and how you went there.
My first interaction with Manipur was in 1989. Actually,
89?
Yeah, so that's many, many years ago, and I was traveling with a poet friend of mine who writes in English, very well recognized poet, Manipuri poet Robin Nom.
Okay.
And out there I met Pradeep Panjobam, who is the editor of the Imphal Free Press. Pradeep had just left his Times of India job in Delhi and had gone there to set up some news media. That time it wasn't Imphal Free Press. And Yambam Laba was there, and I remember Robin's father, who was a doctor, had an ambassador car, but Robin did not know how to drive, so Pradeep was a chauffeur. And Pradeep, Laba, Robin and I, though they are much senior to me, but we traveled all over Manipur.
Okay.
And that was my first introduction to Manipur. I've written that on one of the chapters in Chain Pauna Bazaar about the 3 photographs that I have from 1989 tour. I didn't understand much about the turbulence.
Okay.
I got a sense of that things were not right, but it still wasn't police commandos moving around. There were still restrictions, but I think more than the restrictions, I was given a different the windows in front that they opened in front of me were far more
different than what you have read and what you have been, the concept what you had about Manipur. Okay.
And the first thing that appealed to me, or I was very amused, is the amount of rice that I saw people having. So and also how people would greet each other in the morning. Instead of saying, good morning, they would actually say that, have you had food today? So, which I thought was extremely amusing, of how food is such an important part of the whole, the social fabric. And that's why, in that book, I devoted, I think, an entire chapter on food.
On food.
Yeah, because I think the Manipuri, anywhere in the world, would come together just because, some Manipuri food is being cooked somewhere, or and every time they travel somewhere, they carry their food and herbs where they go. So this absolute fascination, fanaticism with food was something that also amused me. And those are the things over the years when I later started reporting.
Okay.
And I started visiting that place. Happened because in '89 I wasn't reporting that. I just
so '89 you just went on a personal visit.
Yeah, on a personal visit.
Okay, got it.
And then, of course, much later I started reporting, and I after years of reporting, after about 15 years of reporting that place, I realized that the first introduction of Manipur, which was through food and through music and through rubies and that was coming from Tamu and that those kind of things, or even of the beauty of that place, was somehow completely lost in reporting only violence. And
that's one of the video which I had shared to our audience, on where you said that you did as part of your job the reporting of the conflict. But I guess people don't pay for reporting the normal life and the lifestyle of people and how people survive or how people rise from all this conflict. And I really love that speech.
That that we need multiple narratives to really defy the single story. The single story, what it does, it traps people into a stereotype. It robs people of their dignity, of how they are eking out a normal life against all odds. Instead of that, we just had, I know the nature of the beast was such that we had to report. Obviously, if there is a huge shootout or a blast and people are dying, you obviously report the death. You don't that time go and celebrate a festival that time. But there wasn't, the balance was not there. All balance also, it also needs resource. It's not that
that's true.
Resources are also they're always a crunch on resource. So you would obviously go and report what is in an emergency situation. And for decades, the state went through that kind of an emergency. It still is. And obviously you prioritize that kind of report. But what I felt is that it robs the people of its dignity. It robbed people of their ability to speak their voice, and we were hearing only one kind of voice, only one picture of those protests on the road corners of the ladies sitting with that utensil out there. That was the stereotype of Manipur. I mean, the mourners. It was a state of mourning.
So all people saw is the conflict and the protests, but there are a lot of other things which are not being covered. So from your perspective, like, what are the initiatives you have taken, to not to correct that, but I guess to expand and show the world about the other narratives? Because I do see that you when you go out and when you talk, you do talk about all this, and I'm sure you have done more. So if you can share a little bit about that.
So the natural progression from the book. So the book was an attempt to really defy that, because in the book we have stories about an army officer who buys a tractor to restart a cotton mill, which the army had occupied, which is again defying the stereotype of what the army looks like out there. It talks about a gold medal winner from Asian Games, a lady who's also a homemaker. It talks about music, not in a very stereotypical way, but how young boys would wear the dhoti and the pagadi and perform the pung chalom, and actually after that very seamlessly slip into their denims and get onto the motorcycle and go and perform a rock concert. So this fade in and fade out is something which is fascinating in Manipur, which is not there anywhere else. So I thought that was one attempt. The other progression that happened beyond the book was where we are sitting right now is the Reach Out Foundation, which was founded to basically find out ways and means of addressing racial and ethnic discrimination. While trying to understand discrimination, I figured out that one of the reasons for discrimination is when people get prejudiced, and prejudice comes from stereotyping. So again, I thought that it kind of really connects those dots of why these areas are stereotyped, whether it is a Chhattisgarh or whether it is a Jharkhand or whether it is a Leh and Ladakh or a Kashmir or many of the states of Northeast. Northeast itself is a stereotype that we need to break. And we started an attempt at independent journalism on a digital platform called Our Stories, as in OUR, ourstories.org.in, where we are trying to experiment, explore, and say that every story must be told. irrespective of whether it's a positive story or a negative story. I don't think so. There is anything
Right.
called a positive or a negative story. Story is a
story.
story.
Right.
A story must be told honestly, credibly, told well, chronicled well. And if we can have that, I think that is one way to be able to challenge and dispel stereotypes. If we can do away with stereotypes, a lot of the problems that we actually face in Manipur or in Delhi,
Or in any place.
any other
Yeah.
place, can actually be addressed.
Okay. Congratulations on that. And I did see some of the article, and I'm very excited that, you know, there are initiatives from, as again, it's not stereotyping, but people call mainland India, like, you know. So that's really nice that, you know, initiatives are coming up to bring out stories which are not covered, but really bring the life of people over there.
Yeah.
Other thing what I have personally seen is me coming from out of Manipur, but also having spent, you know, a lot of time in every part of Manipur. I have had very good experience also. And I think it is very important to tell that stories about how mainland India and Northeast people gel together in a very positive way. Because people, like you said, again, talk only about the conflict or the racial discrimination. So is there any initiative or from your end in our stories to promote such kind of stories, so that, because I feel that there is a lot of miscommunication between the people, and I think those stories will help gel the people together.
Yeah. No, I don't know whether we have any stories as of now, but you know, the foundation, the Reach Out Foundation, actually was formed out of a hockey academy in Bangalore, and it was run by our managing trustee, still being run by our managing trustee Harini Kota,
Okay.
who from her own little money would, she is the executive member of the Karnataka Hockey Association. She's passionate about hockey, and she would get Indian hockey captains like Ashish Balal to mentor children, but she was very particular that she wanted to pick up children from Manipur, from Jharkhand, and from tribal Rissa,
Okay.
because these are three areas that play a lot of hockey.
Okay.
Haryana also plays, but Haryana has facilities. These three areas don't have facilities. So she would select children from these areas, bring
Okay.
them to Bangalore, train them in hockey as well as other normal
Sports.
studies.
Okay.
And many of them actually got absorbed into hockey teams in at the state level out there.
Okay.
So these are stories which, of course, again do away with the stereotype that that people out here. What we also did is that people keep talking about it, right? About discrimination and
Right.
about racist attack. I wasn't very convinced as a journalist even of what the extent would
I
be.
see.
So what we did is that for the first time from the foundation, we undertook a survey, a qualitative and quantitative survey
Okay.
done by experts from Center for Policy Research, which we call the Discrimination Survey on Delhi NCR,
Okay.
which was released in 2014 December and was partnered by the National Human Rights Commission when the report was released, in which we actually found out that contrary to the belief that that everybody feels that they are discriminated and everybody feels alienated, that's not so. It was a alarming percentage of 45%, but it was not 95%. People don't
As
think,
we expect and as
Yeah.
it has been portrayed
yeah,
in the media.
Yeah. So that's not the.
So has this
the
been published?
Yeah, the report was published and it's available online.
Oh, okay,
It was,
I would love
it was
to
covered
look
by
into it.
media widely, but
Okay.
even in Manipur it was covered. But there hasn't been any traction on that. There hasn't been any real engagement with that report. I thought that report was a very important piece of documentary evidence where you're not talking in having drawing room conversation, but actually having real data. But I'm not very sure that we are comfortable with having real data which make us challenge our own perceptions.
Right.
That is one. The second one is that another survey that we want to undertake is, and I am a victim of that,
Okay.
is of the discrimination that I have faced in a place like Shillong, where I grew up, just because I did not look like the people there.
Okay.
Okay, so what we call the reverse racism, I
Right.
don't call it reverse racism. What I would say that there hasn't been any study, any academic or otherwise, even journalistic, of the number of people in those states and that
Right.
region who have been thrown out, killed, maimed, made to disappear over the last 20, 30 years just because of xenophobic attitude, just because they don't belong to that place
To that place.
ethnically.
Okay.
If that is also that is much worse than what or the number of incidents that one has seen in Bangalore or in Delhi. So I think that it also needs to be
Brought up.
documented, brought up, so that it shows that either way it's bad, whether it happens back in Shillong or Manipur or Assam or Kokrajhar or in Delhi or in Pune or in Bangalore, that doesn't matter.
Right.
I mean, we need to recognize, as long as we recognize that there is discrimination, I think that is a starting point.
Yeah, I think generally, like when people talk about racism, if we all, like irrespective of where I come from or you come from, we work together and fight against racism, then I think it's good. But what I have seen is, like you said, like, people say from the Northeast come to Delhi and there are some incidents of racism and there is a huge protest and other things and media coverage. But if the same people are doing the same thing back in Manipur to other people, it doesn't make sense. And that's what I have been trying to write, speak out, and I think I do get a lot of resistance in that. But like you said, it is important, particularly for people. When I say people, like since I'm from Manipur, I'll talk about Manipur. Being a native of Manipur, if I recognize and say that yes, we are talking about racism, we do have racism in Delhi, but we also do the same thing to other people. So if we recognize that, and I think we can all hold hands and rise together and fight racism as a whole.
Absolutely.
So yeah, absolutely, you're right. And
in fact, there's this little anecdote that Rishan Keshing had told me, where he was at that point of time the longest serving chief minister of Manipur, and he was a Tangkul.
Right.
So the Meitei would say that, see, we don't have a problem of Tangkul being the chief minister, because that's been we have it as in reality. But Rishan told me that as a young boy, when he would come down from Ukhrul, just outside Imphal, he and his father would complete having their meal and water, because inside Imphal, they would not allow them to have. So that was also, there was a discrimination then, which of course was done away with. So we have discrimination at every level.
Every level, you're right.
And we need to recognize that.
Right.
I'm not saying that is going to be over in a day, but at least if we recognize it, then half the battle is over.
Right, and also recognizing and expressing, I think sharing, like how we are sharing it, be it social media or any form of media, particularly celebrity, I would say that they should speak up and know where they stand, because it's important, for everybody to know where one stands for any issues.
Totally.
Right,
totally.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So coming back to your book, I want to get to your latest book a little later, but about Che Pauna Bazaar, can you share a little bit about how much time you spent in Manipur on writing this book, your research, and again, like things which you haven't shared in other media?
Che in Pauna Bazaar is a product of many years of my visiting Manipur, and of these stories that I collected on my way, which were not important for television reportage, but were important for me. They stayed with me.
They stayed in
Some
your
of the
heart.
stories I revisited. Some of the stories I could not revisit because I could not, find those people. So I had to recreate them, reconstruct them. But in most cases, I could revisit the people again, or the places again. Say whether it was Tamenglong or whether it was Ukhrul or Churachandpur, and I had over the years I had these notes, and I had I had kept them with me, these stories alive in me. I had engaged with them, many of them, over the years. The one story that was not there with me, and which I thought would have made people out there uncomfortable, even while telling me, or even when the book came out, but I was very happy and pleasantly surprised that that it was not really, there wasn't an adverse reaction to it. Was the practice of having more than one wife. Okay. Even knowing Manipur fairly intimately over 2 decades, I did not know that such a practice was prevalent.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even now I have seen in many families as in people whom I know closely, I am not seeing that much in my generation, but I could be wrong. There could still be practice in other places. But yes, it is there.
Yeah.
It is there,
So,
but
yeah.
you're right, it's not published.
It's not published, yeah.
Yeah.
So that is, and I started talking to people, to friends, and they started talking about it.
Yeah.
They said that we've never spoken about it, you know, to anyone, really, and they obviously were not happy with it. They obviously, you know, I mean, they said that as growing up years, there was enough angst in them,
Right.
but it was more or less socially accepted. So, and then, you know, just as a matter of coincidence perhaps, but if I asked, you know, 5 people or 6 people from whom I took, you know,
Your research
there,
and
yeah,
notes.
all of them
Knew somebody or close
yeah,
by.
no, and their own families.
Oh, in their own
And
families.
I had visited those families and I had no idea.
Oh, you didn't know about it.
I had no idea.
Right.
So that feature I found, it was not about having a judgment. I'm not
Right.
judging a society, but I'm just saying that is an important aspect of the Meitei society which was not really talked about or written about, at least in the, you know, for a non-Meitei to understand. So that was something new that was in the book.
Okay.
The other aspect, again, I told you, is that which always fascinated me about is the fade in and fade out between tradition and modernity. So you can have this same boy wearing the traditional attire, joining a funeral rite or a wedding ceremony, and coming out and having a spiked hair and, you know, using a smattering of Korean and, you know, probably playing drums in some rock concert. Now that very seamless and very easy transition from tradition to modernity is something that is I haven't seen in any other part of the country or subcontinent also, which completely makes me, you know, love this place even more. Also, I think I could be wrong. There is no scientific way of proving it, but I haven't seen another place where people have this endless striving for excellence. Okay, in certain areas, it's just the opposite. In Manipur, I mean, it's completely on the regressive side. Okay, say politics. Okay, I don't see any excellence there, or in a few other fields. But individually, I think collectively, I don't know where the society is heading towards. But individually, I have not seen any other group of people or any other community striving for excellence, not mediocrity. Overall, what has happened with this country is that we become very mediocre and we become very happy with mediocrity. I find that in Manipur, this thirst for excellence is very fascinating, and that should be celebrated.
Monica, finding the voices.
Finding the voices.
Finding the voice.
Air Force
I could see my father. Who came to meet my headmaster because he was unable to pay the fee. I'm sorry.
Because we need such story for people to have faith in the government and the system that yes, it's working.
Let's bring peace in our home state, Manipur.
Who have got the job without bribery, they'll do justice to their job, and they will help raise the standard of Manipur.
Me ma chen kre ha do ai adu paraga tingau gi
Hari ini rokok.
the second book, Blood on My Hand, it's a new book. I haven't read it, but I have ordered it and I'm going to read it. If you can share a little bit about why you decided to write this. I know that there are a lot of contents which would, I think, change the thinking of people in knowing the real things, what are happening over there. So if you can share a little bit about this book.
You know, for people in Manipur, Blood on My Hands, Confessions of Stage Encounters may seem very routine. We've been talking about encounters. Now, encounters, very curiously, my first editor of the book, who was an Australian gentleman, thought that it was a thriller because, and I had to tell him that no, it is not a thriller, it's a non-fiction, because the word encounter, and we forget, living in India, word encounter in the West means a romantic encounter. Okay, encounter does not mean killing. We've somehow, the word encounter has entered our lexicon as a bad word. However, we know that these kind of shooting encounters have been happening, and a whole lot of cases, we know about 1,500 of those cases were presented to the Supreme Court, and men, you know, claiming that all of them were fake encounters. As a reporter, reporting on conflict, we have reported these killings. Now, curiously enough, when we reported those killings, we always, again, that was the norm, that was the journalistic norm, you took the official version when the death came.
Okay.
So the news comes that one person, one KYKL militant has been killed by, you know, 17 Assam rifles in a joint operation with the Manipur commandos. Now, sitting in Delhi or Guwahati, you wouldn't send a team to Churachandpur to ascertain whether this case of killing was genuine or not. That resource is not there in any part of the world. No journalism can have that kind of resource. Only if there is a severe backlash, like the one we saw on stone pelting in 2010 in Kashmir, or in the case of Manorama, or you know, when Sharmila really, people understood why Sharmila was fasting, or the 2009 you know, encounter of Sanjit and Rabina. Only in those cases does the media then go in, send in teams when there is a backlash. But for day-to-day information, official report. That is when you take the official report. That is the norm. But when I was doing that for such a long time,
so you knew the difference. You knew the difference in the official version and the reality.
No, we always suspected.
Okay, you suspected.
Yeah, but because we did not have the time to go there or the resource to go there, we left it there. Only when there was a backlash we would go.
Okay.
And there was no, even if I went, say for example there's a dead body there, what would I, as a journalist, do I have the ability to even understand whether this was a fake encounter or not a fake encounter? I don't have any way to understand it, because that is done by forensic, ballistic, those are the kind of investigation that happens. That's a different agency altogether. We don't have that ability to even understand whether what kind of an encounter it was, right? But I was curious because we always suspected. And that is when I came across a number of people, particularly one army officer who is serving army officer, and who over a drink actually ridiculed me, saying that, you know, what you all think as fake encounter is not even fake encounter. He says fake encounters are encounters where a genuine militant is picked up or an overground worker is picked up, and instead of handing them over to the due process of law, we just finish him off. He says that is not even a problem for us. He says these are the false encounters which you don't even know about that we keep doing routinely in our units. And I was like, really? I mean, how come we don't know about it? And why didn't we know about it? I was embarrassed that I've covered conflicts for such a long time and I had no idea that anonymous people who do not have any identification, so which means not a passport, identity card, Aadhaar card, no way can the state trace them. Those are the people who are picked up by an organized mafia, kept in nurseries for the police and the army to buy from them. They are auctioned.
Okay.
And so these people are picked up and they are killed, and what is going to be passed off as an encounter, we may call it a fake encounter. It's not even a fake encounter. It is actually, this person has nothing to do with militancy whatsoever. In Manipur, the word called shopping was there. So when they would run out of kills, they would go shopping in nearby Assam to pick up people, bring them and kill them. In Jammu and Kashmir, the Machil encounter, where 6 army personnel, including a colonel, has been court-martialed, have been sentenced actually to life, was the case where again porters were picked up who had come for jobs and they were killed, their faces were mutilated. Manipur went a step further. Manipur did it much more blatantly than other places. In Assam, the mafia was far more, is very active. I've spoken to the mafia members there. We did not, of course, name them or identify them here for obvious reasons. But, and then I tried to understand, why would you do this? Why would you do it? Which was obvious. Again, it's something that the media, whether, I mean, all across the media, we missed highlighting it. Maybe we didn't pay enough attention to it, that all the awards and the chakras and the promotions and the citations and everything is related to a head count.
I see.
So it's bizarre that in a democracy you have a very disciplined force, the army, whose performance is judged by head count.
Numbers.
And how would they actually, you know, grade up their performance in an area where there is not palpable insurgency? So in a place like Manipur or Assam, you don't have suicide bombers, you don't have, you know, insurgency like every nook and corner. So you cannot have even a genuine encounter even in months.
So many of the things are made up.
Yeah, so they are just, you know, absolutely. So we are not even talking about the suspected militants.
Okay. So all that is, many of the stories are
many
in your
of them
book,
are here, and of course
read.
out here this names number of people in Manipur based on confessions again of bureaucrats, of policymakers, of the army and of the police, of how it works out there, of whose tacit approval it has in the killing of people. In fact, this is something that I've written out there of the policemen who were responsible for killing of Sanjit, since this issue has again come up again because of the confession of one policeman who said, who claims that he killed Sanjit. But the whole team, the Director General of Police then actually wanted to recommend all these policemen for awards. It was the intervention of a politician who actually said that this would be really bad and this wouldn't go down well, and I don't think so they should be recommended for awards. But imagine the audacity, you know, I mean, where the entire country was shocked by the way this blatant murder took place, and you have the state police chief who was recommending awards for them. And many awards this book talks about, and we know now, and even the government is aware of it, were given out. Even the one of the 2 Ashok Chakra awardees, and one of them won the award from a fake encounter in Manipur, and this is not something that I said or the confession says. This is what the Supreme Court has also indicted. So, you know, there is enough proof to say that, but this book really talks about the details of how the mafia works, of how these anonymous people are picked up, how the shopping continues, and how, you know, it's connected to the award and citations. So we knew about fake encounters, we did not know about false encounters, we did not know that word was used or who they were, and we did not know how routinely and how there's a method in it. And because they have to buy these people, the human head counts.
Yeah, there is a process. And
so how do you buy people? You need money. Where do you get the money from? So in order to get the money, raise the money, you indulge in smuggling, or you encourage smuggling from where you get a kickback. So even that, so which means if it's not just killing people, it is also encouraging a whole nexus of underworld activities.
So you have exposed a lot of people and a lot of events and a lot of things which are not spoken about. So what has been the public reaction, and what has been, is there any reaction or any personal threats or based on the writing of your book?
No, none whatsoever in terms of threats or intimidation or any adverse reaction. In fact, all the reviews were positive reviews, in the sense that, you know, they, in fact, the in Indian Express, the review that came out was by one of their staffers who was a former infantryman, and he pretty much agreed to the book, which gives me great hope. Individually, a lot of my friends in the army have agreed to what it was written. A serving army commander who served in Manipur was very happy that the book has been written. So which means there is a churning even within the army.
That it has to be told
Yeah,
out.
it has to be told, because only when it's told, then only it can be stopped. Because they individually can't come out and talk about it, perhaps, you know, while they are in the services.
In the service.
Okay. So while the reviews have been there, or people have carried excerpts of the book in various publications, I'm a little disappointed with electronic media has not picked it up at all.
Okay.
For whatever reason.
So the pickup probably might be because you haven't visited, and because the book is newly released, right?
It was, no, we have had 2 launches in, or 2 book launches in Guwahati. We've had one in Shillong. I'm waiting to go to Manipur. So while newspapers in Manipur have carried the excerpt, or have actually carried the excerpt, there have been 1 or 2 reviews. In Assam also they have had an interview. In Shillong perhaps none. In Nagaland again excerpts. But there is no engagement. I mean, I expected people out there to be able to, it's chilling. The narrations, the confessions are chilling. And if people in Delhi are disturbed reading the book, people in Kashmir have been discussing the book, the civil society, the journalists, the police. In fact, in the launch in Delhi, the first launch, we've had the serving additional DGP of Kashmir Police, Shiv Sahai, who was part of the panel. But I'm yet to see any kind of engagement really with the book and with the really the dynamics of how it happens, because this is the first of its kind where we actually split open the whole mechanism of fake and false encounters. That has not happened in the northeast of India, and that disappoints me. It concerns me.
Yeah, but you know, I'm here for the book. This has brought me, and I'm a native from Manipur, and I have seen, at least in my social media feed, like a lot of people have ordered the book, read it, and I think it's just a matter of time and us sharing about it and letting people know. And as you know, in the Northeast, electronic is a little bit challenging, so I would think that more personal reviews, or you know, kind of you going over there or people going and talking over there would be helpful. So good luck, and thank you so much for writing about Manipur, and also telling the world about what's happening, and we look forward for more. So is there any other thing you would like to mention or share to your listeners, any message to your listener before we wrap up?
Not message really, but you know, I'd request everyone to really visit that website that we are trying, where we are trying to collate and curate voices from the ground, and voices, again, the voices that you said are otherwise not heard. It has multiple, we want multiple narratives on every issue, from every place, from every community, from wherever, because you know, the tagline of that is called "Every Story Must Be Told." And you know, the website is www.ourstories.org.in. We'd love contributions. We want quality journalism, but we want all kinds of stories and not just one kind of story. So we cannot be just going to Nepal only after an earthquake. We should be able to, you know, have stories out of Nepal in every season, you know, with or without earthquake. We want stories out of Manipur, not just when there is a flood, or when there is a, you know, a bomb blast, or when there is, you know, some fire raging. I mean, we want other stories as well. Not the stereotype cliches are nothing bad, but we cannot have only the cliched story. We need other stories as well. Right. And that because I'm again repeating this, I've done this like thrice in this program, but I'm doing it. We cannot rob people and places of the dignity. We have to give them this voice to speak. And this is an attempt to really, because that solves a lot of problems. That it's not just about the stories. The stories, what stories do is that they punch holes in our perception, in our heads. And through those holes, we are able to get a glimpse of the other, of whom about whom we had a different perception. Our perception can change. So we need to change our perception, and we want stories. We want to push stories to change perceptions.
Thank you so much for your effort, and thank you for the books, and keep writing, and we look forward for your work and more books to follow.
Thank you so much.
Please tune in at Finding the Voices.